Thank you, everyone, for being here on this fine morning. So nice to see all of you. So, today I will be talking about visual narrative. And I have already been asked this morning before, is this going to be about the art? Is this going to be about the business side, mobile? Is it going to be about, how do you make games? Well, actually, it's going to be about all of it, because that's what game development is. It's the mix of various disciplines to actually make the most of the experience for the players. And we will talk about what actually the narrative means, not just the wall of text. But before we go there, how many creatives we have here in the house? Not just artists, but writers and so forth. Hands up. Very good. And the rest, I guess, biz. Huh? No? Okay, yeah. So I hope this is going to be also very helpful for the rest of you who are not from the creative side of the game development. But before we start with that, a bit about me, just so you know what I do. My day job, I am a CEO of MyTale, a game development company from Finland that is focusing on narrative-driven experiences in mixed reality. But we also do gamification, serious games, and as well our own IPs, that one of them I will show today. I'm also newly elected chairperson of IGDA Finland. I'm sure that most of you know what IGDA is, right? Hands up. Yes, thank God. Yes, okay. So I don't have to go there. And then I'm also a founder, chairperson of Hive Turku Game Hub as one of the business centers in Finland, in southwest Finland. Neo Games board member and Finnish Game Association active member as well. And of course, as a game artist is my background, I've together with Chris Stolarski from Switzerland, we made IGD Game Art Special Interest Group, to which you're most welcome to join. I can give more info later. And since that's not enough, of course, I'm also teaching game design and game art at University of Turku. So yeah, as a summary, workaholic, geek, and a mother. And my daughter is a big part of actually my work. And she so far enjoys it. So let's start. So what is the visual narrative? This is something that when people are, discussing about the narrative, they usually think about walls of text. And the visual narrative is actually much more powerful for us as humans from the very beginning of communicating as a conscious beings. Because none of this is actually new. New in the sense that art theory, the literary theory and so forth has been doing their work from the philosophy side since ever. And when you think about how the actual visual narrative works, is how we as humans, very first communication started from the sound, creating it into an image, and that image later being processed back to the sound, which that's how we have languages, that's how we have letters. I mean, that's how the letters have been developed from. So our mind, and we as how our mind works, we react to the images much better and much more effective, and they stay in our memory much longer than any other sense, in a sense. So more than a, let's say, talk or any kind of sound, or let's say if you're reading a text, it's going to, most likely, most of it is going to kind of get out of your head after some time. But the image will stay. And that's where the visual narrative is crucial in the game development and game design. So let's see how this actually works. So why do we play games? The reason why we play games, especially those, let's not talk about free-to-play mobile and more of the casual games that are actually sometimes designed around the fact that you actually play very short time. But let's talk about actual gameplay that might take longer than 6 seconds or 6 minutes, is the fantasy. And fantasy is about the actual experience that the player has inside of their heads. So what happens to a player? This is where the fantasy is. Of course, fantasy is there as well on the top of that. If you want to experience something else out of the ordinary life, so you want to be, space shooter, or you want to be slaying dragons, or you do what. So there is that side of fantasy. But this fantasy, what I'm talking here, is not about that. It's about what you experience, something outside of this world. Because games are new medium of expression, and indie developers are exactly the ones who put this out there to be, the games to be recognized as an art form. Because that's what we use games now. They are not anymore just to be entertainment or to be something that you kind of kill your time with. Games are there to help others. They are, especially that's why I'm nowadays working more with the gamification, how we can use the game technology and knowledge from the actual game industry and all the business side, and how we get the players to actually be motivated to play our games, to actually do some meaningful and actual change in someone's life. So games are extremely powerful there. And the visual narrative is one of the most, actually, essential parts of it. Because no matter how good the code is, no matter how awesome things the coders do in the back of behind the screen, nobody sees that. Nobody really sees your awesome, the best code you ever made, or whatever effects, if these effects are not actually happening there to really get the immersiveness of the point and story experience that you want to give to your player. So that's where the artists, the writers, by artists, not just visual, but all the creatives inside of the development team are crucial. So listen to your devs there and support them as much as you can. So if they insist to have some effect, make it happen. So that's where the fantasy is something that we are giving to the players. Let's face it, most of us who are old enough to have been in the very beginnings of sort of games out there to play from the very kind of very old, now called retro games, which is very frustrating for us, which is seriously, now game museums, how old are we? Anyway, from those games, when you think about Doom, for example, it was so huge thing with the all gore and awesomeness that you are shooting all these monsters and demons and whatnot, and it was so realistic with horrible pixel sort of things. So there is no quality of graphics as such, but the experience that you got through from these pixels were so, so powerful at the time. And that's where the visual narrative comes. So how does it work? Well, basically, once again, none of this is new. In our theory, you can find all of these awesome theories and things to how to implement in the sort of from the visual perspective in any library for free. You just go and get stuff. There is so many tons of materials available. But the thing is how you use that knowledge now in the new medium, such as games, such as interactive experience for our audience. So this painting here, I hope you are aware of it, of its existence. If not, now it's the time to get. So Holbein's painting Ambassadors. This painting, in order to read it through, what happens? How do you actually, what is happening on the painting itself, which we are not going to analyze now, obviously, but the whole position, stuff, the elements around them, how the painting is, the composition, how it's set to actually viewer be guided throughout the painting, telling a story through the elements. You can write about 3 books about this one painting. And this is where iconography, semiotics, and all other theories from philosophy and, art history nowadays, but are basically the essential parts that you, as developers, can use, should use, to get your game out there, to get more power of that sort of immersiveness. And Semiotics, for example, as a study of meaning, and because we as humans, we always find meanings. We find meanings where there are no unintended meanings. This is what we do. And so as such, the basis of semiotics is in sign process, and it's based on the language. And actual semiotics is actually the science of, studying the languages and how we process those meanings, to which that all has been, of course, implemented to the actual visual. And the symbolism is a big part of it. So with the color, shape, size, tone, and many other, like this is just the scratch of the whole, what symbol can be. But also, as developers who are giving our products globally, we have to be aware of differences within the cultures, like the effects that it might be through the tradition, religion, in what historical, let's say, period something is happening, or we want to give that experience forward. And also, what kind of, from the medium side, like how we want to express everything we want to give to the audience through that specific medium out there. So cultural adaptation and appropriation, so that something works here in the West and let's say in Asia, is very difficult. So when you want to export your game to the Asian market, you have to be, and I'm sure most of you have heard of this at least, is that you have to do a lot of cultural appropriation to it, so that everything from the UI design and everything else is more towards their way of understanding and already having previous experience. So that's all big part of how you communicate your game out there, which is the visual narrative. Most of the things that happen on the screen is anyway the visual narrative. UI design is a big, big part of that. And here we have an example of Caspar David Friedrich painting on the left, and we have a screenshot from Horizon Zero Dawn. So once again, AAA games are usually using all of these theories, known theories that I have been mentioning since ever. I mean, all the big production firms. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't, because you can do a lot of things just like Thomas was alone. I hope, how many of you actually played the game? Okay, Thomas was alone. Yep, okay, so basically, the game itself is a masterpiece of this sort of visual narrative through very simple character design, which is just squares and shapes that have so much characteristics, so much personality that you get in love with these characters, you care about them, you want to proceed forward, you don't want to fail, and so forth. That's the visual narrative. How do you actually get connected to just a bunch of blobs on the screen? No matter how awesome graphics are in the Horizon Zero Dawn, they also, if they didn't have incredible narrative implementation there, it also might not feel that, but they did incredible job, obviously, with the game itself. But just saying, also from the indie side, you have all the power to do success such as this. Of course, another example of how do you use known things around, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Just use already all the existing knowledge out there and whatever works for your product per se. The only thing that how to do it, and because every project is unique and individual as such. So I will just share one thing from my experience as traditional artist. I'm actually have MA in classical arts, and from being a painter and someone who has been doing mosaics, graffiti, frescoes, and whatnot. Also, I have been doing the digital art side. So when you have an artist, when you start with an idea, you usually start with an idea, and then you go through selecting the elements, what medium you're going to use, what message, and how that message is going to be given through that composition, just like in Holbein's painting, how you're going to lead your viewer, your audience, through your painting to give a story. But now when you work in the gaming industry and you have a whole team of designers and others who are there giving you as a concept artist, like, we need this. So how do you do that? It goes other way around a bit. So you start with the goal. You start with the goal that is like what you need to have on that concept art. You have to integrate the message and all the elements which are essential for that on that one concept art piece. And then, very important for us, especially in mobile, the usability, that all of that, how is it actually going to work? Because no matter how cool image is, if it's not functional, actually, it's going to be a really big problem for users and also for performance, like depending on which device you are having. So you have to have it very cheap. And that's when it comes to most efficient. So these are kind of the two different approaches which comes from the creative, like just having your own way of going and working in a team on a specific goals of a project. Even if you work in your own stuff, you always have to set yourself goals, because otherwise you're just going to float off and get feature creeps, the same as you would in the game development. So stay away from feature creeps no matter what. And when it comes to why, for example, Zelda has been, from the very beginning, no matter that graphics went awesomely forward, of course, and all the other tech development and whatnot, but for example, Zelda and many other IPs that are still very powerful worldwide, I mean, as a success. Why is it still so powerful? Because of consistency. They give that fantasy, that experience to the player from the very first Zelda ever published to the latest one. The fans get what they expected. That's the thing. Even that everything else got more fancy, yeah, that's all good. But you as a Zelda fan and you want to play Zelda game, you know what you're gonna get because that's their job. That's why they're successful. They give what basically that fantasy that they promised in the first place. And that's where it comes to consistency. So even if you're making, let's say, history-based games, something with the tanks or something with, I'm sure we have some wargaming people here. So you have to keep them to do a lot of research, make sure that all these facts are there because your core audience is a bunch of, war fans and historical nerds. So they're gonna be really, really upset if you make some mistake there because you are breaking their fantasy. That's the thing, do not break fantasy. If you make some sci-fi or whatever, you make whatever other sort of world because you are building the world, no matter how freaky it is, no matter how weird it is, it's fine. The weird becomes the rule. And as a rule, stick to that rule. That's why, again, you are giving that fantasy, don't break the fantasy. Same thing goes here with, for example, with The Witcher, which did exactly like marvelous job with combining different things because you are allowed to combine, let's say, folklore, history, fantasy, because there are some actual locations in The Witcher that are from the real world. So how do you do it? Appropriating, again, knowledge from different disciplines to get that most of that experience out there for the players, because that's the fantasy you're selling, and then stick to it. Same like this. Why weird is okay? Weird is fine, because you create that world. You are the builder of that world. You stick to you create the rules. Same like, Nier Automata. How many of you played that one? Quite many, good. So basically, her outfit is a disaster for running in the sand fields, right? But it's fine. They worked around it. They also made huge changes when it comes to camera changes and the actually gameplay modes within the game. And first it was a bit confusing, but it worked. It worked for them. They made it work. So again, weird is fine if you create it as a rule and you stick to it. Because then player is very good. Don't underestimate the players. They are good to adopt. That's not fine. That's not a problem. The problem is that as long as it's in the same fantasy you are selling, you're fine with that as well. Like everything is cool, and they're gonna follow you. They will respect your decisions as you did as a designer. There are some games that, in my opinion, did not, even though they're fine games. Is it time to start dancing here? Yeah, okay. So they didn't do that well, in my opinion, when it comes to this sort of sticking to the consistency. They're good games, but they failed a bit when it comes to this sort of, there are lots of moments when, there are many more, who would kind of break that fantasy. Same with Mass Effect Andromeda. If you wanted, as a huge fan of Mass Effect, Andromeda is a good game as it is, but the reason why it didn't succeed and why it was kind of, especially for the fan base, disaster is because they put that Mass Effect in front. And if they just made a new game and said Andromeda, that would be success. But they said Mass Effect Andromeda. And they did not deliver that fantasy that we wanted. And therefore, they broke that fantasy. And yeah, it's a fine game, but it's not what we expected. So be careful with that. And how in practice does it go? I mean, as most of you are professional devs here, so you know how it goes from concept art to actually creating the world forward. Basically, it starts from, concept art should be done really fast. 15, 20 minutes tops per piece just to see that everything, and the reason why it's super, super important is that that piece is putting whole team on the same page. Because if bigger team you have, well, more management, of course, is involved, but it's also like all these ideas and all these things that everyone has individually need to be put on one place to really be coherent and really put everyone on know exactly what the goals are. And that's the thing with this concept art. It's actually can save, if you have a concept artist in the house, it would save so much of the development budget because that is going to give you this sort of avoid all those things that might not work, let's say, with the 3D model and stuff afterwards, because this is going to set these goals and path for your project. Same things with the animation. Here we have a Cuphead as a very extreme example, but the thing with the animation is, of course, really important part of the visual narrative, because every time when things happen, even if they happen like all the time, whatever messy background you may have, like here, that lots of things are happening, still, with the right timing and the right way, focus, putting the player to actually focus on the important bits and pieces, like what is an actual goal in this scene, no matter what else is happening around the environment, is visual narrative. This is how you lead and give the priority to player what to deal with first, second, third, and so forth. And those who are animators and work on animation, they know exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to this sort of primary, secondary, and so forth animation sequences. And yes, so when it concept art, this is where most of this initial story bits, technical side, everything goes through, basically can be put through the concept art if you have a concept artist in the house to actually communicate this to the rest of the team. Because that's what we as concept artists do. We put your words into actual images that everyone can understand and we all agree upon. Here are some very fast examples of what one of the projects that we are working on. It's called Clay, and it's a post-apocalypse RPG roguelike, but I can only show some older things. These are from the last year's spring, so just some first examples of how it goes. So from setting up your some of the character designs, like how you get inspiration from and develop your character forward. Of course, this one little enemy looks much different nowadays, of course, but this is how it started. And then when it comes to UX design and how do you do that, how do you again put everything properly communicated to a player, is that player always has to know where I am, what I'm doing, what challenges am I facing, and can I actually achieve them, or do I need to get more whatever skills or whatever it's necessary. Am I in danger to lose the game? So again, all of these parts are visually given to a player because player moves through that world, no matter is it 2D, 3D, whatever world you're having. And another thing really important to have when you are developing concept is knowing your audience, because your audience is already having expectations. If you are making shooter game, they already from the previous shooter games, and if that's their core interest, that's going to shape their expectations to your game. So you want to do that so that it fits the genre. So genre itself gives a lot of already guidelines of how you should kind of approach your visual expression when it comes to UI and UX, at least. Of course, you can break the rules naturally if it makes sense for your project, but don't break rules just for the sake of breaking rules, because lots of people will have a problem to actually onboard to your game. So respect the players when it comes to genre, what you are developing for. And here are some examples of very well, if not genius ways of doing UI and UX. Alien Isolation, I think, is one of the best UI designs ever made when it comes to UI design, how they actually did it. The first on the left, very dark image, but it's Outlast, and then of course we have Journey, and then Hellblade, which did everything. I'm not gonna spoil for those who didn't play, but it has all audio, actual UI inside the game. And some examples of our process with the Clay game. So how we went from the concept to actually building the world inside of this randomly generated dungeons that we are creating. And again, this is super old. This is from last summer, so the game is much further than these examples. And here is a very short, that old video. When we were setting things up, what the feel around the dungeon would be with a okay-ish quality of graphics. So it's a turn-based game. Yeah. So as a conclusion, for you artists in the house, and I mean from the visual side, light is your best friend. So much you can do, not just the color, but lighting, and this sort of like how different atmospheres and things you can do, the effects you can actually pull off just by focusing on the light is incredible for the storytelling. And concept art in prototyping, again, is the big part of making sure that research and everything else is really set to the right direction. So you are avoiding all of these loose ends and feature creeps and whatnot. Player is a creator of fantasy, so everything happens inside of our heads. Even if we all watch just now the same, well, even these slides, we all experience them differently to our own personal preferences, previous experience, and whatnot. So movies and books and so forth equally well, and people play games differently. So the fantasies are different when I and you play Nier Automata. So that's the thing. Player is the one that actually creates that fantasy. But we provide them the tools, the ways, the stuff, what they can do inside of that world. And please ship the game, especially indies. Just bloody ship it. Don't be afraid. Press that bloody button and get over with it, because it's fine. It's fine. If you fail, so what? It's not a failure. It's part of your development. It's part of yourself, your creation, and be proud of it. Even if you're not proud with the result, you could do better. It can always be better. So don't be afraid of that. Just do it. So that's pretty much, I don't want to do a Nike commercial, but yeah, just ship it. So ship it. And yes, I would like to hear actually a few comments, or more comments than questions, because we can of course discuss more after this. I will be here for 2 days. But please feel free also to be in touch if you have any comments or questions afterwards. I'm just across the lake in Finland, so it's not that far away. Thank you.